Hey, Foreclosure Fix family, this is DJ Alojo, and welcome to another episode of the Foreclosure Fix podcast, where our goal is to help 1 million homeowners successfully navigate foreclosure. You have come to the best place on the internet, online, and the best podcast if you're facing foreclosure. Y'all, I am fired up about our guest today, Jose Bernard. Welcome to the podcast, man. How you doing?
Hey, man, doing great, man. Thanks again for having me.
Jose is a real estate investor in the Connecticut area, and he has helped tons of folks who have been facing foreclosure. And so today we're going to have a nice little conversation about what are investors looking for when they reach out to you, how do they find you, and then talk about some unique and creative ways that he's been able to help homeowners who have been facing foreclosure. So Jose, do me a favor and help our listeners understand a little bit more about you and about your business and how you intersect with those people who are facing foreclosure.
Absolutely, man. So I've been doing this now for about 12 years. I started this at a very young age, and fast forward to today, we do both. So we do small multifamilies and we do house flips. A lot of times, listen, I understand 100%. Whenever someone's facing a foreclosure, a lot of times it's not a fault of their own, but a fault of something that might have happened in their life at that time that might have been out of their control. So when we approach as an investor, what we try to do is show them that they have options. And some of those options involve bringing someone like myself as an investor who could either reinstate their mortgage and get them back to current, or could actually buy the property at either a short sale, basically working an agreement with the bank for the bank to allow the property to be sold for a lesser amount than what is owed on that mortgage. Or there's other things called like sub-2 that we've done as well, where we take over the title, but the actual mortgage itself still stays on the seller's name, and we are actually the ones paying that mortgage, so it avoids a foreclosure happening to that person on their record.
Got you. So before we go any further, I want to kind of unpack a couple of the things that you said and a couple of the terms that you said for our listeners who may not be as adept in real estate as you or I, right? So the first thing you mentioned is that you may help reinstate the mortgage for a homeowner. So just help our listeners understand, what a reinstatement is and how that process works when dealing with an investor.
Absolutely. So an investor like me will want to buy the property. And will want to buy the property before the property goes to auction or it goes to the entire foreclosure process. So as an investor, when I sit in with an owner, we're talking about the situation that they're going through, the first question is, do you understand your reinstatement amount? And what that reinstatement amount is, how much do they owe, not just the balance of the mortgage, but remember, you're going to have fees on top of that if you haven't paid your mortgage for X amount of time. Also, the mortgage company is going to tack their lawyer fees or legal fees on top of that you're also going to be responsible for. So all of that is in the reinstatement amount. And the reinstatement, all it does is once you pay that amount, then the mortgage goes back to current and it takes it away from the foreclosure process from continue happening and going.
Got you. So for those of you who are unaware, when you are facing foreclosure or even at any time you're delinquent on your mortgage, there are two things that you can get from your lender. One is a payoff, which says, how much do I owe right now to completely pay off my loan? And that payoff will have any late fees on it, any interest that accrues, any legal charges that may have happened, or any advances that the lender has made on your behalf. And so when you get a payoff, that is getting the amount to completely pay off or satisfy the loan. However, on the reinstatement, as Jose said, the reinstatement doesn't give you all the facts for paying off the loan. The reinstatement says, how much do I owe to make the loan current again? And so as of that, it may just be one, the late payments that you missed and the interest and fees, or if it's already initiated legal and things like that, those legal costs may also be on there. And so that's the big difference between those two, right? The next thing I was going to say that you talked about, Jose, was the not reinstatement, sorry. You mentioned that you all sometimes reinstate the mortgage, but then you also mentioned that sometimes you take it subject to, right? And if you've been listening to our podcast for any time, we have had a podcast on the topic of subject to. But Bernard, help people understand kind of what it means when you take a property subject to.
Absolutely. So subject to, what it means is that the title is being transferred, but the debt or the mortgage is not. So the debt or the mortgage is staying on that seller's name, but we are taking on the reinstatement amount. So we're paying the reinstatement amount to get it back to current. We're from now on moving forward with making those mortgage payments until we either pay off the entire mortgage or we refinance the property out of that seller's name. And the actual title or the actual ownership of the property now is on us, not on that seller anymore.
I got you. And so what you're saying is that you are taking title to the property, but the loan is actually still staying in that borrower's name, right? And so help my listeners understand, when would this be a good idea? Because it sounds like the investor is getting all the benefit and not the risk, right? So help my listeners understand when this makes sense.
Absolutely. So you gotta understand, a lot of these things are time sensitive. It will depend on the situation the seller is going through, right? Like you just talked about earlier, we talked about payoff amount and restatement amounts. For your listeners, one of the things that I face a lot with sellers when trying to help them out is that they wait for the very last minute to get those two pieces of information. And if you're dealing with a bank and a foreclosure, things a lot of times get delayed. Paperwork doesn't just get sent overnight to you. So sometimes you might ask for that information. It takes a week, 2 weeks to get to you. And if you wait at the very last minute, it might be a little too late at that point. So when it comes to the subject to, is the same thing. This is something that has to be kind of thought out in advance, because there's a process, a legal process of changing title, contacting the mortgage and all that stuff that happens. So you cannot do something like that at the very last minute. Now, subject to will work for someone in the following situation. Subject to will work for someone who, for some reason, they got into the foreclosure process and they were prepared to walk out of the deal or out of the situation with a little bit of money rather than not making anything and losing the property. So when we take subject to, not only are we making the mortgage current, but we are also paying the seller whatever amount we negotiate in order for them to allow us to take that mortgage under their name. So this benefits the seller when they're sort of, the back is against the wall. They don't have other options because the house is too late. They can't sell it on the market for whatever reason. There's no one out there who will take on the debt. So the only option is to actually go through the foreclosure process. So as an investor will give you an option, say, hey, listen, what we could do is we could help you out. We could provide you X amount of dollars, and then we will actually take on the debt. We will actually take the title, and you can walk away from the deal with a little money in your pocket as well.
Gotcha. And so I know that there are some different actors online who are promoting subject to in a big way right now. And it's something that seems very, very popular. Help my listeners understand, what are the risks and downsides for them in that scenario when they do sign over the property subject to.
Absolutely. And keep in mind, full disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. So I'm going to tell you the advices that I get from my lawyers when dealing with this, right? So you get a lot of people that what they will do is just do a subject to an LLC. That's sort of like the norm and what you hear a lot of people talk about. But if you really deal with this at another level where you're doing it constantly, or you have a lawyer who does this and knows a lot about this, the proper way is you move that property to a trust. And then that trust, the beneficiary of that trust becomes investor. The reason why you do this is because it hasn't really happened, but there is a clause in your mortgage that says when the title is transferred, the mortgage company has the right to call up the entire mortgage due. So in essence, once you switch that title, the mortgage could turn back around and say, hey, guess what? Now I need the entire payment paid in full. But there's a certain specific trust, and I'm not sure if it's related to the states, but I know in Connecticut, at least this works out, where it lowers the risk of the mortgage company being able to do that. But as the seller, the other also risk that they're taking on is that they're trusting that the investor is going to be making those payments. Because remember, the debt's still on the seller's name. So if the investor defaults, then you're still on the hook for the debt. So that is something that you got to do this with someone. You got to make sure it's a reputable investor, that they could show a track record that they've done this. You got to make sure that, your paperwork, that you get your own lawyer when you're doing a subject to, so you can make sure that all the paperwork is done correctly. Because again, you're still on the hook for the debt if the investor defaults on it.
Gotcha. So there are multiple things that I want to point out right now for all my listeners and everyone who's watching. Number one is, we are not advocating any type of subject to deal or any type of reinstatement or any type of deal. I think every real estate situation, every real estate transaction can go a myriad of ways. And it's so important that one, you vet the people you work with, whether you're working with a real estate agent, a real estate attorney, or an investor. It's important that you vet them. Number two, our goal here is to provide you with different options that you can consider when facing foreclosure. And as we all know, the quicker you take action, the better your outcomes are, right? And so the more options you have available to you, the quicker you take action. Number three, as Jose said, he's not an attorney. I'm not an attorney. He has obviously done transactions like this, and he's giving you his insights from his professional opinion. However, you always need to make sure that you understand the transaction before you sign your name on anything and before you go into a partnership. The other thing is that there are risks when you do things like subject to. The risk is that that investor or whoever could not pay that mortgage. Now, when they sign their name to it, they are obligated to pay. However, you can't force anybody to do anything. And so we always want you to be aware of the risk associated with all these strategies, because some investors are nefarious and some are unscrupulous, just like you have bad real estate attorneys, just like you have bad real estate agents, just like you have bad homeowners, you know what I mean? And so you just have to make sure you spend time vetting the people who you are working with. And so with that being said, you mentioned something else a few minutes ago, in addition to subject to. Another way in which you all help homeowners, right, is by kind of finding them, whether it's a multifamily situation or a single family situation. But how do you actually go about kind of finding these homeowners? Because one question we always get is like, how come everybody knows, or why is my phone ringing all the time? Why am I getting so much mail, right? So how are you finding the homeowners who are facing foreclosure?
So it's public information. So as soon as the court files that foreclosure notice, it becomes public. And there's companies out there that's what they do. They literally just put together a list of all this public information, and then they sell it to investors like myself. But I will tell you one quick note, and it was great that you mentioned this, is that this is not about me or anyone advocating for subject to or any other kind of deal, but it's really about putting out that there's options that people have, because a lot of people don't know what they don't know, right? And I'll tell you this, one of my favorite things to do in real estate, I have sat with people that they have opened up to me as far as their story or how they got to that point, because obviously there's a story behind when you get to the point of being foreclosed on, right? And you have to make sure that the investor that you're working with has your best interest in mind, because there's investors out there that I will tell you it's just about the dollars and the profit, right? And there's investors out there that, just like everything else, you got good ones, you got bad ones, and you got some in the middle. So you got some of them that are going to have truly your best interest in mind, but also understand that they have to make money. So they're also going to be looking at how they're going to make money in the situation. But I have met with people that I have honestly told them, like, hey, listen, the other option that people have is they could go to the bank and say, hey, I have a purchase and sales agreement for an amount lower than what is owed. And they could try to go through the route of maybe getting a short sale approved. Now, with the short sale, again, you have to do all these things with time in advance, because short sales, the bank, we had one recently that took 5 months and the bank denied it. And the bank denied it about a week before the auction actually happened. So if you got someone who's just banking on potentially avoiding that foreclosure from happening based on a short sale, at the very last minute, the bank might just turn around and say, no, we're not accepting it. And then if you don't have a plan of what to do, now your house is going to be auctioned out in a week from that time. So make sure that when you talk to an investor, do it with ample time. Like, don't wait for the very last minute. Again, this is what I love your show, because it's more about showing people options. So just make sure you have options, but you have to wait in advance. Don't wait for the last minute, because a lot of those options are not doable if you're waiting for the very last minute.
100%, man. And so three things that I want to point out. One, when we classify investors here at the Foreclosure Fix, we classify them into three different categories, right? Number one is the snake. And the snake is that investor who you talked about, who's only in it for themselves. They only care about the money, right? You don't want to work with the snake. Avoid snakes at all costs. Number two is the newbie. The newbie is that new investor who's maybe done a deal or a couple deals and is new to real estate. And newbies are great. They have great desire and they want to build a business or help you. But the problem with the newbie sometimes is that if they don't have experience facing foreclosure, you're on a time clock. And so dealing with a newbie may not be the best person to deal with because of the fact that they may not know what they don't know. They're experienced and they know more than you, but they may not know enough to get you across the finish line and help you avoid foreclosure. You want to work with a professional and an experienced professional. When you're facing foreclosure, you want someone who has been there and that's done that. You want someone who has gone through the process of helping homeowners who are been in similar situations. And so you really want to make sure if you're facing foreclosure that you get somebody who has your best interests at heart, whether they're a real estate agent or an investor or an attorney, and that they have experience helping people when facing foreclosure. One thing that you really touched on, and I appreciate you for bringing it up, is the fact that you had somebody who was doing a short sale. And then a week before the foreclosure sale, the short sale was not approved. Do you know why that was not approved? And then also, what did you do to help that person, in that situation, or were you out of time?
We were out of time. And the reason why it was not approved was because, so two things have to happen. There's other liens with this particular deal, because every deal is different, but with this particular deal, there were other liens such as taxes, sewer, and water liens as well. And again, it was very last minute. So it got into the point where the amount, now you don't just have the bank foreclosing on their amount, but then you also have these other liens right behind it. So that was one reason. The other reason too is because when you do this process with the bank, most banks, you're going to have to show some kind of financials to the bank. You're going to have to kind of show the bank that you are in a financial standing where you could actually make this work. So those two things did not happen in this particular deal. And that's why the bank at the very last minute said no. But this is the other thing of it. The banks are some banks move fast, some banks move very slow. And you just don't know. You're literally up in the air. You don't know. I've done something with banks where I haven't heard for 9 months. You just don't know. That's why I keep saying, like, you have to do those things with ample time in advance. Because if you're against the clock, especially with banks, more likely than not, it's going to be very hard to make anything happen, especially if it's a big bank where you have to go through 10 different departments to get one answer. It's going to be very hard to make it happen in a very short time.
No, you're definitely preaching from experience, right? I can tell you've had that frustration of being on the phone with the bank and getting bounced around from place to place to place to place, right? So for those of you who are listening who don't understand what a short sale is, a short sale is basically when the bank is saying that they'll take less than what they're owed if the situation makes sense. And the reason why they'll take less than what they owed is because the bank doesn't want the property back, right? They just want to be paid. And sometimes when you have a property that may be in really poor condition, or there are tax liens on it, sewer liens, whatever else may be the case, sometimes the bank is willing just to take less just to move on and not have to worry about those things themselves. In this scenario, it doesn't seem like they were, and that's why they said, no, we're not going to move forward with the short sale, because you need to get bank approval for a short sale. Oftentimes, the homeowner will have to provide to the bank, one, proof that they don't have any more money, right? And money that they can't pay something on it. But then also, two, in most short sales, the homeowner cannot make any profit on the property. And if they do make any profit, it's very, very minimal. And the reason why is because the bank is saying, hey, how are you going to make profit when I'm not even getting what I'm owed? And so that's typically what happens in a short sale. The process for a short sale could be as short as a couple weeks if you're dealing with a small local community bank. Or like Jose said, it could take months and months and months and months. And so you always want to make sure you start that process as soon as possible. So, Jose, I'm so excited because this brings me to my favorite part of the podcast, which is our bow tie round. It's where our listeners get to tie one on with our guest, Jose Bernard. The B in bow tie round stands for your best advice for somebody facing foreclosure. The O stands for one thing you are grateful for. And the W stands for your wildest or most interesting foreclosure related story. So Jose, what is your best advice for somebody facing foreclosure?
So best advice, again, act with ample time. Do not wait for the very last minute. I kind of kept saying that because that's one of the things that I've seen. I have sat with many people that I would have loved to help, but it was a little bit too late. So whatever you're going to do, the options that you're going to explore, do not wait for the very last minute to do so. Do it in advance.
Awesome. What is the one thing you're grateful for right now?
I'm grateful for right now, man. Family and health. The business is doing well, but at the end of the day, if you don't have loved ones around you to enjoy it with, and if you don't have the health to do the things you really want to do, business money doesn't mean anything to you.
Man, you hit a salient point right there for all of our listeners and those who may be listening to this and facing foreclosure. And, you're throwing your hands up saying, I don't have the resources or the financial wherewithal that I thought I had. The fact that you have family that loves you, the fact that you have your health, right, to be able to go out and work and play and do whatever you need to do to be able to get better. Those are two important things that you should never take for granted, regardless, because your financial situation can change just like that. And so,
and that's important. And I say this to people all the time, especially when someone's facing foreclosures or is going through a rough path in their life for whatever reason. Your mindset, a lot of things are going to be out of your control. Your mindset and the way you look at things is one of the few things that you truly have control over it. And at the end of the day, it could be a bad situation, but within every bad situation, you look around and you can find something good.
I agree 100%, man. Well said. So your wildest or most interesting foreclosure related story?
So that we had a property facing foreclosure, and the property, the way that this happened was this is a very unfortunate situation because the daughter kind of got handed this foreclosure down to her after the dad passing away. And the reason why it was one of the wildest ones, it was because they didn't know this until after the foreclosure happened and they went to the property and all of this. But this property literally had another house basically attached to it. It was a single family, but literally they had, I don't know how they did it, but they did it without any permits or anything like this. So they had kind of built this other house to it, and it was such a mess because now you're dealing with appraisal. You're trying to figure out what the house is really worth, what the bank had, what the insurance had was something completely different. So that was a situation that it was the wildest one because it was the person going through the foreclosure. This was all a surprise to them. And the bank, this was all a surprise to them. So to everyone, it was a surprise to them.
So how did that one work out? What happened with the, I guess, extra house?
So what ended up happening was they ended up, the city ended up putting it on their paperwork as a duplex. They ended up putting it on the paper as a duplex. Then actually worked out in their favor because the house appraised for a higher amount. So they had a little bit more options as far as selling the property now, rather than what they actually owed. So that actually worked in their favor at that time.
Awesome. Well, I love it when the stories work out, but I can imagine how difficult it was to get that one worked out. Well, man, Jose, we appreciate you so much for coming by the podcast, and you're definitely considered a part of the Foreclosure Fix family. Do me a favor and let our listeners know how to get in contact with you, how to follow your journey, your social media, and stuff like that, so they can stay connected to you.
Absolutely, man. We'd love to connect with anyone who has questions or would like to just get an opinion. On Instagram is where I'm most active, and it's at Jose Bernard Investor. So it's just my name, Jose Bernard Investor.
Awesome. So y'all know how to get in contact with the man if you're interested. He is in the Connecticut area. So if you are facing foreclosure in Connecticut and you say you want to just talk to somebody about your situation, feel free to reach out to him. He's open, he's accessible, and he's doing some great things both in the community there in Connecticut around financial literacy and back home in his birthplace, the Dominican Republic, where he's helping folks who are helping folks with education and schools and stuff like that, man. So huge kudos to you. And again, we appreciate you for stopping by the podcast. Y'all, I appreciate you for listening so much. That brings us to the end of our podcast. If you all know someone who this podcast, who this information, who this content can benefit, please do us a favor, like, subscribe, or share our content with them so they can be helped in their time of need. In addition to that, grab a copy of our new book, The Foreclosure Fix, 12 Proven Steps to Beat the Bank, Escape Foreclosure, and Turn Your Property into a Profitable Asset. Y'all, I appreciate you so much. Thank you. God bless you, and I'll see you soon. The views and opinions on this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. If you have a specific legal question, we highly recommend you contact a qualified legal professional.